For decades, Tom T.hall was known to the world by a simple, yet perfect, nickname, the storyteller. He was a man who could see into the soul of ordinary life, the quiet moments, the unspoken truths, the simple pleasures, and weave them into timeless songs that felt more like conversations. He gave a voice to the common person, his lyrics a mirror reflecting the lives of millions. But when he died at 85 on August 20, 2021, the story of his own life came to an abrupt, and unnervingly quiet, and, the first announcement of his passing was brief, a simple confirmation from his son that the legend was gone. But in the weeks and months that followed, an information vacuum formed. The official cause of death was withheld, a stark silence that stood in deafening contrast to the rich, narrative world he'd created. That silence fueled whispers, rumors, and a growing unease throughout the music world and among his fans. What was being hidden? What really happened in the final hours of the storyteller's life? Now, the full, tragic story has been painstakingly pieced together from official reports, insider accounts, and the quiet confessions of a life lived in the shadow of immense talent. The final chapter of Tom T.hall's life is one he never would have written himself. It's a story darker than any ballad he ever sang, a heartbreaking conclusion to a life that brought so much joy and understanding to so many. And it's not good. This was the man who taught us that happiness is found in old dogs, children, and watermelon wine. He took us to the Harper Valley PTA and made us feel the sting of small-town hypocrisy. He showed us the quiet dignity in a week spent in a county jail. Tom T.hall wasn't just a singer. He was a philosopher with a six-string guitar, a poet for the forgotten man. His songs were honest, they were real, and they made you feel like he had it all figured out. And that's what makes the truth of his final days so hard to swallow. Because while he was writing the stories of our lives, the last, tragic chapter of his own was being written in silence, a story of pain and despair that no one saw coming. To understand what really happened in that quiet home in Franklin, Tennessee, we have to go back. We have to understand the man behind the myth, the light and the shadows that define the life of the storyteller. To really get the weight of this mystery, you have to understand the towering figure Tom T.hall was in American culture. He wasn't just another country singer in a rhinestone suit, he was an institution. The nickname, the storyteller, wasn't some marketing gimmick. It was a title given to him by another legend, Tex Ritter, and it was an honor Hall earned with every line he wrote. Along with guys like Chris Christopherson and Mickey Newberry, Hall helped usher in a new era of smart, sophisticated lyrics in Nashville. Before them, country music often dealt in broad strokes: love, loss, cheating. Hall dealt in details. He was a journalist with a melody, an observer of the human condition who found deep meaning in the mundane. His genius was his ability to listen. He'd drive the back roads of America, sit in roadside cafes and beer joints, and just soak up the world around him. He wasn't looking for huge, dramatic tales, he was looking for truth. This is how a song like Old Dogs, Children and Watermelon Wine gets made. The song, one of his most iconic, came from a real conversation he had with a janitor at a hotel in Miami. He didn't invent the character, he met him. He didn't create the wisdom, he just recognized it and had the grace to write it down. The song's opening line, "How old do you think I am?" he said. I said, "Well, I didn't know." He said, "I turned 65 about 11 months ago." It feels like a transcript, a moment of real life captured and preserved. The song became a #1 hit and a cultural touchstone, a gentle reminder of life's simple, essential truths. Rolling Stone would later name it one of the 100 greatest country songs of all time, and then there was Harper Valley PTA. Released in 1968 and sung by Jeannie C. Riley, the song was a bombshell. It was a scathing, witty, and perfectly told story about a widow in a small town who gets called out by the school board for her supposedly scandalous behavior, only to turn the tables and expose all of their hypocrisy. The song was a phenomenon. It shot to #1 on both the pop and country charts, a rare feat that showed just how universal it was. It sold millions of copies, won a Grammy, and even inspired a movie and a TV series. For Hall, it was proof that his unique style worked. He'd taken a simple story about small-town life and turned it into a national anthem of defiance. His own hits as an artist were just as vivid. A Week in a Country Jail was a wry, observational tale of a man's uneventful but memorable lockup. The Year That Clayton Delaney Died was a poignant tribute to a local musician who had mentored him as a child, a real man named Lonnie Easterly. The song was so personal, so specific, that listeners felt like they knew Clayton, too. It was this ability to create a universal feeling out of personal experience that set Hall apart. He wrote for Johnny Cash, Loretta Lynn, Alan Jackson, and George Jones, his songs becoming part of the very fabric of country music. That he won a Grammy for his album Notes, wrote novels, and hosted a national TV show. He was inducted into every Hall of Fame that mattered, the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1978, the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2008, and, in what he called his crowning achievement, the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2019. This was the Tom T. Hall the world knew, a wise, gentle, and witty chronicler of life. A man who seemed to have a deep, calming understanding of the world. His public persona was one of contentment, a man who found peace and success by just telling the truth. This image, built over decades of brilliant work, is what made the eventual truth of his death so jarring, so completely incomprehensible. The story he told the world was one of simple wisdom. But behind the scenes, a very different, much darker story was unfolding. To understand the man who would become the storyteller, you have to go back to the beginning, to the hardscrabble hills of eastern Kentucky. Thomas Hall was born on May 25, 1936, on a place called Tick Ridge, near Olive Hill. It was a world away from the bright lights of Nashville. He was one of 8 kids, and his family was, by his own account, dirt poor. His father worked in a brick plant and was also a part-time minister. Life was not easy. From a very young age, Tom found his escape and his voice in words and music. He started writing poems as a little boy, inspired by the Grand Ole Opry on the radio and the everyday chatter of his neighbors. He got his first guitar when he was just 4 and wrote his first real song, Haven't I Been Good to You, at 9. Music wasn't a hobby. It was a lifeline, a way to make sense of a world that was often harsh. Tragedy struck early. His mother died when he was still a boy. Not long after, his father was permanently disabled in a hunting accident. The weight of responsibility fell on young Tom's shoulders. He quit school as a teenager and took a factory job to support what was left of his family. But even as he worked to make ends meet, the music never stopped. He played upright bass in a bluegrass band called the Kentucky Travelers, performing at local schools and on the radio. These early years forged in him a deep empathy for working-class people, a perspective that would shape his songwriting for the rest of his life. He wasn't a tourist in that world, he was a native. He knew their struggles, their small joys, their language, and their dignity. In 1957, looking for a path out of poverty, Hall joined the U.S. Army. He was stationed in Germany, a move that would prove to be a huge influence. It was there, performing on the Armed Forces radio network, that he really started to hone his craft, writing funny, narrative songs about life in the service. The Army gave him distance and perspective, letting him see his own culture from the outside in. After his discharge in 1961, he used the GI Bill to study journalism at Roanoke College. That choice says a lot. He was drawn to the mechanics of storytelling, to the art of getting a point across clearly and concisely. He supported himself by working as a DJ at radio stations, spinning records, and soaking it all in. He was living the life of his future characters, a man on the move, a voice on the radio, an observer watching the world go by. It was during this time that he married his first wife, Opal Hootie McKinney, and they had a son, Dean, in 1961. But the marriage was short-lived, another chapter of struggle in his young life. These formative years were a crucible. The poverty, the family tragedy, the hard labor, the military, the study of journalism, it all came together to create a unique artistic voice. He wasn't a Nashville insider. He was a man from the hills who had lived a full life before he ever wrote a hit song. He had a novelist's eye for detail, a journalist's commitment to the facts, and a poet's ear for the rhythm of everyday speech. He was building the foundation for the storyteller, one hard-earned lesson at a time. The road to Nashville was next, but it was these early chapters that gave him the stories he was born to tell. In 1964, Tom T. Hall made the fateful move to Nashville. He arrived not as a performer, but as a songwriter, hoping to sell his unique brand of story songs. He landed a job with New Keys Music, a publishing company, for a meager $50 a week. The expectation was insane, right up to 6 songs a day. It was a songwriting factory, a place where many aspiring artists would have burned out. But for Hall, it was a boot camp. It forced him to be disciplined, to treat songwriting not as some mystical art, but as a craft. It was his publisher who made a small but key suggestion: add a middle initial. And so, Tom Hall became Tom T. Hall. It was a simple change to help him stand out, but it somehow gave him an air of folksy authority. His first big break came in 1963, when the singer Jimmy C. Newman recorded his song DJ for a Day, and it became a top 10 hit. That was his ticket to Music City. Once in Nashville, he kept writing for others. He penned Mad for Dave Dudley, another top 10 hit, and in 1965, he wrote his first #1, Hello Vietnam, for Johnny Wright. The song, a patriotic tune during the escalating conflict, showed his knack for tapping into the national mood, but his most famous composition was just around the corner. He wrote Harper Valley PDA, based on a story he'd heard as a kid in Kentucky, about a fiery woman who stood up to the town's hypocrites. He tucked the song away, not sure if anyone would ever be brave enough to record it. It broke all the rules. It was long, wordy, and controversial. Then, a young singer named Jeannie C. Riley heard the song and knew it was the one. Her defiant performance and Hall's brilliant lyrics created a perfect storm. Harper Valley PDA was an absolute sensation in 1968. It shot to the top of both the country and pop charts, a crossover smash that made Tom T. Hall the most talked-about songwriter in Nashville. The song's success was so huge it changed his life overnight. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural event that showed the power of a great story. That massive success finally pushed Hall into a recording career of his own. Producer Jerry Kennedy at Mercury Records encouraged him, and he signed a deal in 1967. At first, his career as an artist started slowly. But as the 60s turned into the 70s, everything clicked. He started recording the songs that only he could sing, the deeply personal and observational stories that were his trademark. A Week in a Country Jail hit #1 in 1970. The year that Clayton Delaney died followed it to the top in 1971. Suddenly, Tom T. Hall wasn't just the guy who wrote Harper Valley PDA, he was a star in his own right, a leading figure in a new wave of smart, introspective country music. He joined the Grand Ole Opry in 1971, cementing his place in the country music elite. He had made it. The poor boy from Kentucky was now one of the most respected artists in Nashville. And he'd done it on his own terms. He had proven that a song could be more than a catchy tune, it could be a short story, a character study, a piece of social commentary. He was building a kingdom at Fox Hollow, his sprawling farm outside Nashville, and he was about to meet the woman who would become his queen. In 1965, at a music awards banquet in Nashville, Tom T. Hall's life changed forever. Across the table was a woman named Iris Lawrence, a British-born songwriter who wrote under the name Dixie Dean. She was there to pick up an award for a song she'd co-written. Tom, never one for small talk, reportedly opened the conversation by asking her if she liked potatoes, a line that didn't exactly impress her date for the evening, the legendary Mother Maybelle Carter. But Dixie was charmed. They ran into each other again, went fishing, and a love story began. They married in 1968, and Tom T. and Dixie Hall became one of country and bluegrass music's most beloved partnerships. For the first part of their marriage, Dixie took a step back from songwriting to focus on her other passions, mainly her charity work with the Nashville Humane Society. Meanwhile, Tom's career exploded. The 1970s were his golden years. He scored a string of #1 hits, including the timeless Old Dogs, Children and Watermelon Wine, the sweet and simple I Love, Country Is, and I Care. He also released one of his most cherished projects, the 1974 album Songs of Fox Hollow. The album, featuring songs like the playful Sneaky Snake, wasn't just for kids. It was a celebration of the simple, joyful world he and Dixie were building at Fox Hollow, their farm in Franklin, Tennessee. Fox Hollow wasn't just a home, it was their creative sanctuary. Tom T. Hall was at the peak of his fame. He was a regular on TV, even hosting the popular show *Pop Goes the Country* from 1980 to 1982. He wrote books, befriended literary giants like Kurt Vonnegut, and cemented his reputation as country music's resident philosopher. By the mid-1980s, though, Hall started to grow tired of the road and the music business grind. He mostly retired from writing in 1986 and from performing in 1994, content to live a quiet life at Fox Hollow with Dixie. But Dixie, who Tom said was one of the most driven people he'd ever met, wouldn't let his talent just sit there. She told him, "I said it was okay to quit the road, but don't give up on music. Music is too much of a treasure to throw it away." She started writing songs again, and soon, Tom couldn't resist joining in. And so began the second great act of their creative lives. Together, they became a powerhouse bluegrass songwriting team. They built a studio on their farm and dedicated themselves to writing for bluegrass artists. Their partnership was incredibly prolific. They had different styles. Dixie had what Tom called a homicidal imagination, often killing off characters in her songs, while Tom was more observational, but they complemented each other perfectly. They won Bluegrass Songwriter of the Year an astonishing 12 times. In 2018, they were inducted together into the International Bluegrass Music Hall of Fame. Theirs was a true partnership, built on mutual respect, deep affection, and a shared love for the power of a song. For 46 years, they were a team. Fox Hollow was their kingdom, and music was their language. These were the golden years, a long and beautiful season of love and creativity. But as is so often the case, the brightest days are often followed by the darkest shadows. The beautiful, creative world that Tom T. and Dixie Hall had built together at Fox Hollow came to a devastating end on January 16, 2015. On that day, Dixie Hall, his wife, his partner, and his muse of 46 years, passed away at age 80. The loss was profound and shattered the peaceful life Tom had known for nearly half a century. Dixie wasn't just his wife, she was the engine of their later life, the one who had coaxed him out of retirement. With her gone, a vital part of him was gone, too. The energy of Fox Hollow seemed to fade. The man who once traveled the country searching for songs now retreated further into his solitude. His public appearances, already rare, pretty much stopped. In the years following Dixie's death, the storyteller fell silent. While it wasn't widely known at the time, those closer to the story suggest that Hall had long battled his own demons. There was an acknowledged history of depression and mental health struggles that had impacted him for years. The death of his beloved wife seemed to pour gasoline on those underlying issues, casting a long shadow over his final years. The grief was immense, a heavy cloak he could never fully shake off. As one person later reflected, after years without her, the loneliness could have taken its toll. There were other struggles, too. As he aged into his 80s, he began to face the inevitable indignities of time. Reports from those who claimed to be close to him mentioned his physical health was declining, including a loss of mobility that was hard for the once vital man to accept. There were also whispers of developing cognitive issues, subtle changes that were nonetheless frightening. This combination of deep grief, chronic depression, and declining health created a brutal storm of despair. The wise man who wrote Old Dogs, Children and Watermelon Wine was now an old dog himself, facing the twilight of his life without his greatest companion. The joy and simple wisdom that had defined his music seemed to be slipping away. The man who had provided so much comfort to others was now desperately in need of it himself, and apparently unable to find it. He was still the storyteller, but the stories were now confined to the memories and ghosts that walked the grounds of Fox Hollow. The world saw a legend in peaceful retirement, but the reality was far more grim. The shadows were gathering around Tom t.hall, and the final, tragic chapter of his life was drawing near. He was facing a darkness that none of his songs had ever truly explored, a private pain that was leading him toward an unthinkable end. Friday, August 20, 2021, was a quiet, late summer day in Franklin, Tennessee. At the sprawling Fox Hollow farm, the home that had once been a hub of creativity, an unnerving silence was about to be broken. At 11:15 in the morning, a 911 call was placed from the residence. The Williamson County Sheriff's Office and emergency services were dispatched to the scene. What they found was a tragedy that would send shockwaves through country music. Paramedics entered the home and, at around 11:33 a.m., Tom t.hall was pronounced dead. The official report would later state the cause was from obvious injuries. He was 85 years old. Later that day, the news began to trickle out. The first official confirmation came from his only son, Dean Hall, in a brief statement. The announcement was simple: the great Tom t.hall was gone. Tributes immediately began pouring in. Artists, songwriters, and fans shared their favorite songs, their memories, their sense of loss. They mourned the passing of the storyteller, but amid the grief, a strange and noticeable silence settled around how he died. The initial announcement gave no cause. For an artist of his age, it was reasonably assumed he had passed from natural causes. It seemed like an open and shut case, and for many, it felt wrong to pry. The focus was on honoring his monumental legacy. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the silence held. No official cause of death was ever released by the family. In a move that only deepened the mystery, Tom's son, Dean, withdrew completely from the public eye, deleting his social media accounts shortly after his father's death. It was a clear signal for privacy, but it also created an information vacuum. Into that vacuum, rumors began to swirl. On country music message boards and social media, whispers of a more tragic end began to circulate. Some commenters pointed out that Hall's death was especially sad because it had been a suicide. At first, these were just unsubstantiated rumors, easy to dismiss as morbid internet gossip. But they were persistent. The whispers grew louder, creating a quiet, industry-wide murmur that something was wrong. The official story, or lack of one, didn't line up with the darker narrative taking shape in the shadows. For 5 long months, this was how things stood. The public was left to remember the legend, while a cloud of uncertainty hung over his final moments. The mystery of Tom t.hall's death was deepening. The silence from official channels only amplified the troubling rumors. The world had lost its storyteller, and now it seemed the final story was one that no one was willing to tell. But the truth can't stay hidden forever. And when it finally came out, it was more heartbreaking than anyone had imagined. The whispers that had been circulating for months finally gave way to a devastating, official truth in early January 2022, nearly 5 months after Tom t.hall's passing. The first to bring the story to light with verifiable sources was the blog Saving Country Music, which had made inquiries with Williamson County officials. The blog's reporting was soon confirmed by major outlets like Rolling Stone and the Tennessean, who all obtained the official report from the Williamson County Medical Examiner's Office. The document laid bare the tragic reality of what happened that August morning. The medical examiner's report stated that Tom Hall had sustained an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The manner of death was officially and unequivocally ruled a suicide. The man who wrote such gentle, life-affirming songs, who seemed to have such a deep well of wisdom, had died in an act of violent desperation. The news was a seismic shock to the country music community and to the millions of fans who looked to his music for comfort. It forced a painful recalibration of everything they thought they knew about him. The official report offered a few more sparse, yet poignant, details. It noted that Hall was using a prescription drug called chlordiazepoxide, better known as Librium. This medication is often used to treat anxiety and can also be used to help with alcohol withdrawal, hinting at the internal battles he may have been fighting. The report made no specific mention of any other terminal illness and noted that no suicide note was found, leaving the ultimate reasons for his decision shrouded in painful privacy. The revelation cast a somber pall over his incredible legacy. It begged 1,000 unanswerable questions. How could the man who wrote, "I love," a simple, beautiful list of life's small joys like puppies, kittens, and old pickup trucks, end his own life? How could the storyteller who brought so much light to the world be consumed by such profound darkness? The handling of the news was delicate. The journalist who first confirmed the cause of death sat on the information for several days, trying to reach out to t.hall to give the family a chance to comment, a courtesy that went unanswered. The decision to report the cause of death wasn't made lightly but was driven by the fact that the rumor was already spreading in an undignified and unverified way. Reporting the official facts, as tragic as they were, was seen as a way to end the speculation and allow for a more respectful, if somber, remembrance. The storyteller's final chapter was now public. It was not a tale of a peaceful passing, but one of deep, inner turmoil that ended in a